Mike King is founder and CEO of digital marketing agency iPullRank. He's been a search engine land search marketer of the year, and the hits keep coming. Before he was decoding Google, Mike was known on festival flyers as Icon the Mike King, a Philadelphia battle rap phenom who toured with the Wu-Tang Clan, Rakim, Nas, and J. Cole. His origin story is just as colorful. At 12 years old, he taught himself QBasic, scored a Microsoft internship while he was still in high school, where he was, get this, webmaster at Microsoft. This was back in 1996 when webmaster was like still what we called people who did that. And then he headed to Howard University for computer science studies until the tour bus looked more exciting than the lecture hall. That mashup of code and creativity led him to launch iPullRank in 2014, which I could have sworn it was longer than that, but 2014, it's still been 11 years. Great. Where he and his team has driven over $1 billion in revenue through SEO and content strategies for Fortune 500 companies. He's also working on a book, The Science of SEO, Decoding Search Engine Algorithms, published by Wiley and set to come out this August. Today, he is joining us to talk about the future of SEO and, more, just as important, how to measure it. Welcome to the show, Mike King.
Thanks for having me. That was a fantastic intro. I do got to correct you on one thing. It's $4 billion.
$4 billion.
Oh, wow. Don't sell the man short.
No, and look, got to update the LinkedIn.
Absolutely. No, we always we always talk about Jim before he got into the world of digital anything was an obituary writer. And so obviously that was not an obituary, but that's how he got to start and why he was able to give everyone these call ups. So
yeah, amazing.
Exactly. He always crushes those. But no, I'm super excited for today's conversation. Just knowing that there is a lot of fluctuation in the world of SEO, and also just one of these things that has always been a little bit difficult to measure, maybe a reliance on deterministic signals within Google Analytics, but then, a lot of signals are diminishing. And then just this whole question of how do you even know what you're doing is working and so forth. But Jim, I think, how are you thinking about starting? Should we dive into a background primer, given that most of the folks listening, they've heard of SEO, but they might not know about it?
Yeah, I think so. And Mike, feel free to did I miss anything in the intro? Maybe give us
you said a whole lot that I didn't know you were going to say. So I really appreciate you doing the research and all that. But yeah, as far as SEO, I think it has been one of those spaces where people don't really understand what to measure, because it's always been, the idea of rankings being such a forward thing that people think of, but tracking rankings actually never made sense, at least not since Google introduced personalization, because the way rank tracking effectively works is it's like you are spinning up a computer who the first thing it's ever done is log onto the web. And the first thing it did when it logged onto the web was perform a search for your query. And then you're capturing that information and you're thinking of that as a basis of measurement, but it's not a reflection of any user's actual context. No user is just logging on for the first time and doing your search as their first action. So they're going to see something different. So inherently, it's flawed data that we've always used. But, I think like any channel that is a referral channel, the whole goal is to drive people to your website to do a thing. And so I've always measured it in that way. How many people did we drive? Were they successful? Do they complete the goals that we want? And then if we want more input metrics, then we kind of, go further out and think about, who are the audiences that we are actually capturing? And are they the audiences that we want? Are we targeting them effectively? Because ultimately, my goal has always been, how do we drive more qualified traffic to a website?
Interesting. So one of the, interesting trends that we're hearing a lot about right now, and there's a ton of articles around there about this, even a couple of years back, it was even a year ago, the demise of HubSpot's SEO traffic. And this was known as, one of those great organic traffic machines, essentially. So just for our listeners, given that they're largely measurement practitioners, what is happening right now in the world of SEO?
Yeah, so Google introduced something called AI overviews about a year ago. And it's effectively the blurb that you see at the top of the search results, which is pretty robust. You'll see whatever the answer to your question is, and then you see a series of citations that no one actually clicks. So the point here is that it's causing dramatic shifts in user behavior far less people are clicking on the actual results because they're getting their question answered right there in the search. And so the measurement discussion is really important there because people don't know what to do, right? Because you are so used to measuring clicks, you're so used to measuring, the conversions that happen after the clicks and so on. But SEO has always, or not even SEO, search has always been a brand channel, but people don't think of it that way. We only think of it as purely a performance channel. And what I mean by it being a brand channel is, excuse me, users have always come to the search and in some cases not click through because they got their answer from the source. It wasn't because there was an answer box. It may have been they read through a series of meta descriptions and page titles and they figured out what they needed to know and there's no reason for them to click. But at the same time, if you learn the information that you needed and you took an action, that is no different than seeing a billboard that influenced you to buy one product over another. As an example, let's say you were looking for like, oh, which earphones do I use for working out? And then you perform a query and then there was a featured snippet, effectively the precursor to these AI overview things, where it said a list of different things. So let's say one of them was like Apple AirPods and you're like, oh, it's a good option. Cool. I'm just going to go straight to the store and buy it. But in the SEO space, we don't think about that and we don't take credit for it. They think of, impressions as like a BS metric because, we look at things like display that only give you impressions and we're like, well, no one's taking action. Mm-hmm. So my whole point here is that there is value in this and we're starting to truly learn that because it's becoming more of this like 0-click idea where the user doesn't have to actually click through to take an action.
Right. It's like the big shift here is that before someone would do a non-branded search, and let's say you had optimized content for what they were, that answered all of the questions and you showed up in the top of the organic rankings, they click through, maybe they'd never heard of your brand before and they read your content. Now they're like, oh, this brand had some great content. Maybe they have some good feelings out of that. That's all brand awareness and brand consideration. And then when they're ready to buy, that company that produced that article that they really liked comes to mind. The only shift now is that instead of them clicking through your link and going to your content and reading it, they're potentially seeing it in the AI overview or in AI mode or in ChatGPT. They're not even going to Google anymore, right? So, but it's still the same behavior. It's just different mechanics.
Well, yeah, I mean, to some degree, it's a different behavior because, again, like you may have looked through 4 different sites to get to your consensus, like that you derive yourself. Or if the query was more complex, you might have to break it into a series of searches and then synthesize all that information yourself. Now Google is doing all of that for you, and that may cut down on, who's getting the traffic. Google keeps saying like, hey, we're distributing the traffic to more places. But for someone that like built their business on getting the most traffic for an idea, it's not really going to work for you.
Mm. Well, one thing you mentioned about the impressions sort of not really mattering, is that though because they are not deterministic, there's no deterministic idea associated with those impressions like we would see, in the example of programmatic. That is one where I think there's a degree of valuation in large part because there's no click. Often there's no click, very few people click, but there is a deterministic idea associated with an individual that then passes through to the end conversion, so you can trace back in a multi-touch attribution model. Is that why? Yeah.
Yeah, to some degree, because the thing is, like with paid, yes, you do get a lot more, like paid anything, not just programmatic and paid search. You get a lot more data. Whereas with organic search, you're not getting much at all, right? Like we used to get keyword level data. They took that away like 15 years ago.
October 2011. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. The great Google Analytics revolt day. And then there were all these like weird little filter hacks that you could put in place to be like, look, I've re-extracted the phrase match or whatever it was.
Well, yeah, a lot of people try to like, reverse engineer models, which doesn't make sense because your model is based on what the SERP used to look like. And anyway, so we don't have that. And now we're getting a lot, like we don't have any data for AI overviews or AI mode. Google says that, yes, that data is in Google Analytics, or excuse me, Google Search Console, but there's no filter to be able to say like, oh, okay, this is a function of AI overviews or AI mode. And so what we're seeing is like this big decoupling of impressions and traffic. They used to be directly related. Like if your impressions went up, your traffic also went up. Now you're seeing impressions go up dramatically, but your clicks either staying the same or going down. And the value, though, is that what we're also seeing is while you're getting less clicks, you're seeing more conversions. So effectively, you're getting a more educated user when they actually click through. But if your business model is based on, selling ads, that obviously doesn't work for you because you want as much traffic as possible so you can get as many impressions that you saw. So yeah, it's a bit of a mess, and the only thing you can do to recover it is to go further down the funnel in the keywords that you target, because deeper in the funnel there are less AI overview. So the whole like top of funnel or informational content, it's seeing like anywhere from 20 to 60% drop from traffic.
I want to check on something you said. I make sure I understood it correctly. Did you say that Google is including impressions from AI overview in Google Search Console, but you just can't filter it out to say, show me how many impressions?
Exactly.
And oh, wow. Interesting.
Well, when I hear that, I go, is that a cardinality issue? Because I saw this, I think it was a SEMrush report recently where they were saying the average query length has gone from 4 words to 26 words, right? There's some ginormous shift. And I think we've seen a few of those sort of dotted across. But I think part of what I struggle with there is, like, if I'm asking a 26 word query, the number of permutations that can exist when you have 26 words in a query are just infinite, it would seem. And I believe there is a cardinality issue, if I'm not mistaken, within like Google Search Console, where it's, I think you said reporting on the keyword, not the search query, the full query. Is that why there's an issue here? Because quite literally, I'm the only person who's probably searched that, or maybe there's 3 of us in the last week.
So there's that privacy issue that
Yeah.
relates around 100%, because like we said, you're getting to a point where the variance in these queries is going to be so high that it's like you can identify an individual user well. And Google has always said like that's why they don't allow you to get that data anymore. And they're even in GSC, a lot of those queries are anonymized, right? So like you are probably never going to get that level of data from them. Even though we all know the reason why they don't do it is so no one else can do search and marketing, but that's another story for another day. So yeah, it is a problem, but I will say this. I like that the queries are getting more complicated. Like as a user of Google, things are so much better now, right? Like the whole idea that I had to, look at 5 different queries to figure out like where to go on vacation with my kids was a pain. And there's a whole research paper about this by a gentleman named Andre Broder, who you may or may not know, but if you don't know him, you know his work. He's responsible for the search taxonomy that everyone uses. So the navigational, informational, and transactional. He wrote this book he wrote this paper called The Delphic Cost of Web Search. And in that, he talks about there being like a high cognitive overhead for doing searching, because first thing you got to do is like take your information need and convert it into Orwellian newspeak, then put it into your search results. And then you got to look at like all this noise of what's happening from the ads to the featured snippets to then the 10 blue links. And then you may have to do that multiple times because you didn't get what you wanted. So Google is ultimately saying like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. That isn't a good experience to anyone. So how do we put that right in front of you? And to that end, they have physically made the search bar bigger to signal to users, hey, you can put more in here. And so I think as a product, it is a good evolution, but as a marketer, it's not a great place to be.
That's so interesting. Well, in one of the, sorry, did you want to jump in?
No, go
Otherwise, okay. So one of the things that I and you mentioned earlier, we're seeing more conversions. And so that just triggered in my brain. I was like, okay, how do we know that? Because you can't run incrementality on search unless there's a method that you're aware of, but on organic search, because historically that requires either an audience level or a geo-specific holdout, but there's only one internet and there's only one Google. And so you don't have the ability to sort of manually perform exclusions or things like that. How do you know that we're seeing a performance in conversions or lifting conversions?
So it's not the like sophisticated incremental way that you're describing it. It's literally like if you look at the trend over time, traffic has gone down, but conversions has gone up.
Okay. And are there other, so I guess, so would it be fair to say the world of SEO at this moment in time is largely grounded in a in a click-based methodology, and that is maybe what's causing some of the panic in the larger ecosystem when you're talking about we're seeing a decline in clicks, and so you either just have to go by feel, or I don't know, are there any other methods of measurement here?
Yeah, I mean, not really. Like, it's literally, what does the traffic do when it lands on your site? And so, because for so long we've been like, okay, well, let's get more traffic so we can get more, like that linear relationship
Mm-hmm.
existed. Everyone is like, okay, well, we're getting less of that. But again, if we're seeing conversions go up, what does it matter? The ultimate goal has always been, how do we get more people to come and buy things or be leads or whatever? So even if the traffic from the channel is not what it used to be, as long as you're getting those business goals, I don't think it matters though.
Interesting. Yeah, well, it's one of those. I look. This is one of the hardest things about marketing is isolating the impact of a given intervention at one moment in time when this is changing, and then simultaneously, I would imagine that what we're seeing in Bing, for example, with the way that they've thought about showroom ads side by side with the Copilot interactions, where you're now sort of going, there's an organic interaction that I'm having here on the right where I have to influence this agent, and then on the left is an ad. And that is a really strange experience of, well, what's actually driving the click, because you may only see a click through onto your site through a showroom ad. You may never see it from the agent, but the agent really did influence it.
Right. Well, I think, where we're heading is more a world where the web itself is secondary and the agent's experience is the primary thing that you need to like optimize for.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be so much of like people using these interfaces and saying, hey, go do this thing for me, or go find me this information. And they're not going to visit your website, like, period. So the traffic to your website is not ultimately going to be what matters. It's going to be, what were the outcomes? And in fact, if we're talking about, who is actually visiting, if it's the agent, we need to get back more towards like, bot analytics and log files and things, and less about the clickstream analytics.
Yeah, it's interesting because my initial thought is, before, 4 years ago, before ChatGPT came out, we would measure organic search. You could measure organic search like upper funnel, lower funnel, right? How many, now we can just see how many impressions, but where people are seeing our content but not clicking through. Before, they would click through and read our articles, and we would actually be able to measure it that way, right? Are people clicking through and reading our content? And now a lot of that's like, nope, they're just doing a search on ChatGPT. Did our brand get mentioned or not? And I think if there aren't tools already that are doing this, I think there's a lot in the works that are trying to measure how many times your company has showed up in all of the various LLMs to see like your share of voice, as it were, right? And now you're saying,
Yeah.
but that might even be irrelevant a year from now, when it's not the humans that are searching on ChatGPT, it's their agents that are doing that. And so like, yeah, I'm just like, my mind is swimming here trying to figure out
Yeah.
what that means.
So a couple thoughts on what you just said. As far as like measuring upper lower funnel, the way that we do it is by segmenting the keywords and then aligning those with the pages that are the landing pages to figure out like, okay, what's this upper funnel versus lower funnel traffic? You're of course using GSC, so like that's never going to match up with your analytics anyway, but we can kind of triangulate it to some degree. Now, as far as the tools, yeah, the one that I prefer is Profound. I feel like they're doing the best work there. And they're actively thinking about all this sort of stuff. But my only issue with that sort of measurement, like in general, and I'm not saying specifically their tool, is you're trying to measure something that's probabilistic in a deterministic way that doesn't make sense. And again, it's the same sort of idea with rank tracking, but worse because everything is so hyper personalized on these surfaces. So for me to be like, oh yeah, well, I have a share voice of X for this series of prompts. Yeah, that's true for me or whatever, agent on my side that's representing me and doing all these searches, but that doesn't matter for anyone else in the world because their context window is so different. And even personas don't really work in this case because again, it's like these responses are like one-to-one at this point. Now for Google, it may not be so much, at least for right now, because like AI mode, they are rolling out that hyper personalization, that memory and so on. They're using, the personal contacts where they're pulling information from your Gmail and all the other stuff in the Google ecosystem. So I feel like at best, what we can do is some sort of like persona level measurement of that. But even that's only going to be directional. So it's like, how do we measure this in a way that makes sense? I'm not 100% sure, to be honest.
Well, it's interesting because when you mentioned profound there, and my understanding of a lot of these, I guess the modern AI, SEO, or GEO measurement tools is that they essentially use a quadrant ecological model. If you remember back in school, I know, I had to Google that one. I was like, what was this thing that we would throw a wooden square into a field and we'd count the number of bugs in it? The idea is it's a sample of the entire field, and then you extrapolate out from that small sample that you're able to actually count the deterministic bugs within. And my understanding of what these platforms are doing is they are essentially running, maybe 100 prompts a day on a given topic. They're taking a sample of the ecosystem of how they feel about a brand, or are you included? What's the sentiment? And then extrapolating that out. But that inherently is going to be error prone, and the margin of error, the confidence interval there is going to vary quite wildly across the type of query. And I imagine the closer you get to the bottom of the funnel, perhaps the more personalized you may become, knowing preferences and those. Is that how those platforms work?
As far as I understand it, yeah. So I know most about Profound, and they do almost exactly what you said, right? Like they'll have a few hundred prompts or whatever prompts you give them. It can be thousands or whatever, and then they roll all that up into your share of voice and the sentiment analysis and so on and so forth. And like I said, I feel like for what they're doing, it is a great job. I also don't have a better idea of what to do, specifically for like a ChatGPT or AI mode. But, again, when it comes to something like AI overviews, where there is some caching involved and it isn't as personalized, I think that there's some clear things that we should be doing. So as an example, if your brand is mentioned for a non-branded term, that is something that you should explicitly be measuring. Because that is like brand awareness. That is a brand awareness metric. You should be measuring the impressions that you are getting for your non-branded term where your brand is showing up. Because even if a user doesn't click through, you now have like penetrated their mind share when they've done that search, even though they weren't thinking well. And I think that more of the like clickstream tools, like the panel-based tools like SimilarWeb, Datos, things like that, are going to become a lot more important in the SEO space because they're going to give us our only real visibility into those search journeys. So you'll be able to see something like, okay, well, 100 users started from this non-branded term, then they came back later in their journey and they did a branded term because they saw you. And I think measuring the growth of that, or for lack of a better term, the conversion rate from the non-branded term to the branded term, is something of value to indicate that users are finding out about you and then thinking about you as they go through the rest of their journey. So I think that the landscape of measurement for search needs to change. And I suspect the same idea with this, the panel-based stuff will probably need to be injected into tools like Profound and things like that, so we can have those like cross session insights that we otherwise will not be able to get.
Yeah, it's always one of those interesting things where you think about measurement does lead to practice often, because it's the fish climbing a tree problem, in the sense that if you're trying to measure it in this particular way, you'll look for interventions and mechanisms that would have driven to that KPI. But if the KPI here is going to be clicks, well, those are just going to perpetually diminish given the new the nature of an interface versus a surface, perhaps, in this scenario. So that's really interesting. And I guess maybe because I think about this in two areas. There's this way of SEO measurement as we think about, should you invest in doing SEO, should you invest in influencing these agents, and then there is the measurement of the practice to know actually what works. So I'd love to lean in on that side. Unless, Jim, did you have any questions about the macro measurement? Okay, let's talk micro measurement. How do you measure what works in SEO, knowing that it is such a black box?
So the thing is, historically, the black box wasn't so opaque, right? Like you can know most of what Google is doing, because it's all out there. Like if you read the white papers, if you go to talks from engineers that work in information retrieval, like they told us pretty much everything that was happening. The problem now is that with reasoning coming into play, and also this technique that they call query fan out, where you put in your query, your explicit query that you're looking for, they extrapolate that to dozens of other queries, and then they're pulling results for those dozens of other queries, and then taking the most relevant passages and then bundling that all up to then send it through a chain of thought reasoning chain to then generate your response. That we have no visibility into. And even if we did, they are taking all the passages and then saying, compare this one to this one. Okay, whichever ones are the strongest one, those are the ones we send to the final language model to then generate the response. So that, like, what do you even do there? You know what I mean? Like, I can tell you what you do. What you do is you're effectively thinking of optimization as like a matrix problem, meaning that you can't just optimize for your landing page that ranks for that core query in standard organic. You have to also, on your own, replicate what Google is doing in the query fan out, identify those queries, and then figure out where what your landing pages are, and then also optimize those. So it becomes a much harder thing, and there's no tools to support it in the SEO space yet. SEO, like the SEO software industrial complex, is like at least 10 years behind Google. And so it's very difficult when I see people out in the space saying like, oh, it's just SEO, like all these new generative AI surface things, it's just SEO. But it's like, yeah, it would be if SEO was what it should be, and it's not. It's really just like a handful of people who know the deep technical understanding of how things work, who've been building like their own tools, ingesting some of the data that does exist in the SEO software space, and then enhancing that to be more like what Google is doing. So as an example, I've mentioned the idea of passages a number of times. There is nothing that will identify the most relevant passage on your page for a given keyword and then help you optimize that. Everything is just looking at the page broadly in the sense of the keyword. But since we've been in this like dense retrieval world for like the last, 7-8 years, SEO just has not kept up. And so, those are the things that you do, but you have to have, someone that understands natural language processing or computational linguistics or something to help you. And then there's a big gap between identifying the problem and then having a writer that can then optimize accordingly. So there's just a huge gap in our space, and SEO is not ready for this whole GEO environment.
Very interesting. Jim, I can go so deep on this one if you want to, but I know I'm so monopolizing questions.
I'm curious, maybe take us out of the weeds a little bit. I'm curious how the clients that you work with and the brands that you talk to, how they're thinking of this shift from, the 10 blue links to now personalized, answer-driven, zero-click environment where their impressions are going up, but their clicks are going down. I'm sure you've deal with clients, putting out fires every day where they're freaking out, and you have to kind of talk them through like, what are you seeing in the real world with your brands, and how are you dealing with that?
Yeah, right now it's a lot of education because, most clients don't know what's happening, right? Like, because Google also didn't give us any, like, what I'm calling air cover. They didn't say like, hey, user behavior is changing because of, user behavior is changing because of these changes in how we are positioning search results. And so, we've had to like show clients and say, hey, here's what's happening as a result of this. And the problem is like, they don't necessarily believe you at first until you show like, oh, it's across the space, right? And so as the SEO information, whatever, like thought leadership is caught up too. Like you have more software companies saying like, oh, okay, on average it's a 34.5% drop in CTR when AIOs show up. So now there's more information, but at the same time, a year ago, I predicted this. Like I wrote a blog post for Search Engine Land where I was saying like, hey, I think the title of it was, how retrieval augmented generation is the future of search, and here are all the things you think about. And we had built a model that predicted that traffic was going to drop somewhere between 30% for everybody. And we also predicted that there'd be a redistribution of search volume. Like the head term won't get as much. The long tail will be much longer. It's going to get a lot more. The chunky middle will get a lot more as well. And also we predicted that, CTR would be low. So to your question, I had already projected this is going to happen. And we had talked to clients before. They didn't care. They're like, cool, thought leadership, great. That's why we hire you. But then I'm able to come back and be like, see, I was right. And we have a plan. So it's been helpful, but it's still a lot of education because we have this space where like people are like, okay, well, we want to be in ChatGPT. We heard ChatGPT is going to be bigger than Google. First of all, no, why? Like Google is still like 13x in traffic. It still send out way more referral traffic. But because we have the attention for that, we can then showcase, here's an analog, because everyone knows that ChatGPT doesn't send much referral traffic. So being that they know that, I can then show you that on AI mode and also AI overviews, and you have an understanding that like I'm not just making this up and we're just like not doing well with your SEO.
When you're talking about the influence there of well, I guess there's AI mode, and you're talking about query fan out, and that starts to get very complicated when we think about the volume of information that's being processed. But when we think about AI overviews, it seems from personal experiences that they maybe are a little bit more static in nature, and that you can sort of do the same query twice, and you get the same one, if not very similar. Is there any kind of correlation or exercise right now that you're looking at? I guess historically it's always like, if you've got really good content and you've got a lot of people linking back to you, good chance you rank in the first position. That is a model that can be drawn out through causal inference or causal impact that you can use to then look at what is the relationship between this activity and this. Are there activities that you are seeing right now that have a causal inference or a causal lift associated with AI overview integration?
Yeah, so they both use query fan out. It's just
Okay.
that AI overviews uses it to a smaller extent. So while AI mode might do like dozens of queries, AI overviews might just do like 10 or something.
Okay.
Right?
And is that just like the 10 blue links then? Is there's like, these are the 10 links, so if you rank on page 1, that's all it's going to include?
So we, as an industry, and I'm including myself here, we mistakenly thought that you could rank like, number 70 or whatever and still be in the AI overview. That's not what was happening. It's because you ranked number 3 for one of those query fan out rules. So anyway, in answer to your question, the thing you need to do is improve your relevance. And improving your relevance is a quantitative idea. So it's effectively the close-on similarity between the query and the passive itself. And so the way you improve that is by, using semantic triples. So, subject, predicate, object, like that structure in your sentences. You also want to be very specific. You want to have data points in there. So, you want to say like, this was 16% better than that or whatever. That structure in your sentence is an easy to extract data point that can be fed to a language model. You want to improve your readability. You want to structure your paragraphs to be talking about one idea, because vector embeddings are how all of this works. And when you have a bunch of things in the same paragraph and you embed that, it's not going to have as high relevance as if you had one subject being covered in that paragraph. So
Interesting. So it's kind of like if someone's just ranting wildly, there may be some good ideas floated throughout there, but the context is going to be lost, or the primacy of topic. Yeah, no. I think this is all fairly constrained here. It is, though, the nature, I think, of human conversation and podcasts, where that is how we sort of go as we meander our way around. I'm like, I know we're talking about natural language. If that seems a little not natural, or perhaps a little choreographed language, perhaps.
Oh, yeah, but ultimately it's doing that. And of course, yes, like the standard ranking does come into play because the candidate documents are still being pulled from the search engine.
Interesting.
So you do still want to like build your links and so on. But the reality is that a lot of that stuff that was the classic SEO, again, hasn't been done right. And we've learned a lot more about this because all the different leaks that have come out of Google in the last couple years. So there's the DOJ antitrust trial documentation testimony. Then there was also the documents that leaked that I covered last year. And then there was another gentleman who found an exploit in Google where you could see all the metrics used to compute the search. So we have way more information now. And, people broadly would build links based just on volume. But we now know that Google is really looking for relevance on the source and target of the link. And so it is some of the same tactics, but you just got to be more, specific in what you do. Otherwise, they just get ignored.
Sorry, I know, Jim. If you go on, please jump in. But there was an article that I saw recently where Lily Ray had a post about something in the Google ecosystem. Now, obviously, she is a well-respected SEO in the community, but it was on LinkedIn, and it was one of those things where I'm like, well, what's the measurement here? What are the decisions in the measurement in this process as to why that would become the AI overview, basically verbatim? Is that, I guess maybe the question here is there a way to measure entities in this space, even if they're posting on sort of rented ground, like LinkedIn?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the things that we're saying to do now, like build on rented ground, because that is getting a lot more of the visibility. So when you think about all the discussion forums, the Reddits of the world and all that, which I don't think the world needs more Reddit, but here we are. That is one of the things that Google is using because they feel like it is a more, reflective opinion of real people rather than like some polished, optimized piece of content from a business. And so to that end, what you're describing is like people are posting on LinkedIn posts and then Google's like, cool, let me just smash that and throw it in the AI overview because they feel like that's come from a more, what's the word? Unbiased source than if it came from, me writing about myself on my website or something. So right now, if you want to get an AI overview, absolutely, like just spin up a listicle on LinkedIn posts and you got it like right away. But I don't really anticipate that that's going to be something that's going to be so easy moving forward because Google always plugs those little exploits or holes or whatever as they become more popular.
Well, yeah, no, I was just thinking like, how do you even measure that? Because LinkedIn has both incredible content and it's a cesspool of content, and the in between is, did it get social proof? Were there, lots of people talking about it, sharing it, all those kind of things. Is social proof then the signal that is measurable here that you would then use to determine viability of AI intervention?
No, you would measure whether or not it's in the citations of the AI.
Right. But then how did it get to the citation? I guess is like, why was that citation important versus, say, a YouTube video on the topic versus your brand website?
Oh, right. So yeah, that's again where measuring the relevance of the passages become into play. So in the case of a YouTube video, what they're going to do is they're going to transcribe that anyway, and then embed the transcription. So again, it's still going back to, measuring the performance of the words versus whether or not it appears in the citation.
Do you think the AI overviews and AI mode and ChatGPT, are they considering other signals beyond just relevance of the passage to the query that the person asked? So like say like if given two equal LinkedIn posts on the exact same topic, this one got 100 likes and 20 comments, and this one got 10 likes and 1 comment. Is there any? Do you think there's any mechanism in there to look at other signals just beyond the relevance?
Not for ChatGPT, but again, like the relevance isn't just the cosine similarity between the prompt of the query and the copy. It's also through the lens of the personalization as well. So it doesn't fit the contents within that. So that's going to be another like, again, because it's all vector embedding. So it's going to be the relevance between however they're vectorizing the user's context and the copy itself. But in the Google environment, yes, it is going to be some other things that are effectively like the tiebreakers. It's going to be the links. It's going to be, some of the other things that Google is storing, like the user interaction signals So click to time on page or some dwell time, things like that. And Google has effectively composite metrics for all these things, but those also inform the ranking as well. So really what we're talking about is the re-ranking of this stuff after it's been selected. So for you, all you can control is, are you in the candidate documents that initially get selected? The re-ranking is outside of all of our control.
Very interesting. Ah, gosh, I'm just thinking through the implications of what this, like, in even the gym example you shared. I'm like, okay, there's an interesting test here to see, well, what if 3 different people post the same content on LinkedIn simultaneously, knowing that one of them is very well known, especially if they're well known, like one of them's known really well in SEO, one of them's really known really well in paid search. Would they both get citations in that scenario? That's a particularly interesting one. And also when you talk about how they just look at the transcription there, I go, well, how do you measure sarcasm? Can you measure sarcasm? This is the rocks in a backpack, backpack and a parachute problem, right? Or rocks on a pizza problem. Is there a measurement for tonality as part of this?
I know you can measure sentiment. I'm not sure about tonality, and we all know sarcasm has always been difficult for computers.
Right.
Or when I suspect things are getting better, but I don't know that it's like 100% there at this point. But to your point of let's say you've got 3 different people that write exactly the same idea on LinkedIn, they publish at the same time. Google already has mechanisms for that. So, you talk about something like EEAT, people have always thought of that in our space as like, oh, well, the author bio is this ambiguation thing. That's not how it works. How it works is, again, we're going back to vector embedding. Google effectively has a vector representation of every author across the web. And so they're able to say, okay, well, Michael King wrote this and such wrote this. Well, here's all the context I have on Michael King in this vector embedding. I can compare that against the query and I can say, well, this is more relevant. So I'm going to give more value to this one than this other one. So it's not enough to just be like, okay, well, we have the same thing, because Google is smarter than that in their ability to understand where things came from.
That's interesting. Does this open up then the potential to measure? I was thinking if you measure that and you figure out then who are the most prolific entities in a given space, and EEAT stands for experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. For all our listeners, like most of them all first exposures to acronyms, so I always like to make sure that they have that relevance. But when we're thinking through that lens, and you isolate, say, the top 10, is there a world then in which brands go, I'm just going to say Mike wrote this article. Like, I'm just going to put it on my website and just say he wrote it. He's very authoritative.
Yeah, I mean, the ones with no morals, probably.
Right. I mean, look, every ecosystem has the good guys and then the 1% bad guys. And you're like, come on. Like, why? And look, we see it in the measurement world too. There's I would say, a lot of snake oil platforms out there that essentially are trying to claim probabilistic or probabilistic data as deterministic and tell you, like, this is what you need to do next. But they're really just trying to feed themselves of whatever makes themselves look the best, which is a hard one. But that's a particularly interesting scenario just in terms of how that is going to operate. Out of curiosity, is there a measurement now associated with how you would think about, I guess I would frame it as holistic sentiment. And by what I'm getting at here is, if I search or if I ask the query, what are the best hotels in San Diego? And my a brand that I'm working with, they show up there. But then I search, what are the worst hotels in San Diego? Does the fact that they're in the best hotels in San Diego mean they will not be in the worst? Or if you get into the worst, can you not get into the best? I'm just wondering how you measure this, the negative pull of sentiment against the positive pull.
Well, I love this question. Yeah, I think in that case, they're probably looking to aggregate a lot of information. And again, because it's going to be query fan output, they will probably do a bunch of subqueries like, Hotel San Diego's complaints. Of San Diego's, I don't know, pests or something like that. And they're going to basically aggregate all of those. So it'll be like, well, okay, this hotel appears on all these negative queries 9 times, but, these all only appear on positive queries. And when they shuffle it all together, we're able to do that. They're able to understand, like, the differences. So I think that's the beauty of using language models, because they can reason through all that information.
Well, and then the other thing you have to think about from the business side is like, well, we're going to have some people searching best hotel San Diego for families. And for that, you might be the best. But then other people are saying best hotel San Diego for professional trips. And because you're for families, you're not for professionals, or, there's a mismatch there, right? So like you might be the worst for professionals, best for families. So you're showing up as the worst and the best in different categories of it. So it's like, how do you even start to think about that? I don't know.
I'm thinking through the measurement limit. I'm just like, yeah, if you can predict this, then it becomes, you basically have to run 1,000 simulations, right? Like you've got to create 1,000 AI replicas of people in the real world and have them constantly performing searches to cultivate a degree of personalization. And then we just enter essentially a bot-based internet where 99% of traffic is bots and 1% is humans. Am I crazy? Am I going off the deep end here?
I mean, the measurement for SEO has always been heavily bots. Like, think about it, right? Search volume for certain long tail queries are just rank trackers.
Yeah. Which is terrifying to think about that. Well, it's terrifying on one regard, and then the other regard, it's also just like, is this why SEO is not getting the time of day at times with the CFO of companies, right? Is this why? Because there is a lot of value, it's just really latent and very hard to measure. And how do you think folks should be having this conversation right now with their finance teams about the measurement of this discipline?
I have so many thoughts on this. Like the fact that it's the biggest referral channel and it gets paid the least and gets paid least attention has always made me deeply angry. But as far as having these conversations, this is why I'm saying like the brand channel part of it is really important, because there is a different level of investment for brand channels. And there's also not this expectation that's held so high for SEO for brand channels, right? Like, because when you pitch to a CFO, like, oh, we want to do SEO, they're going to ask you for projections. They're going to ask you for all the analogs and competitors and all this stuff. But they're not asking you for that for display. They're just like, oh, yeah, we got to do display. Cool. Here's $10 million, right? Or think about social media. Like, no one's asking for projections for social media. That is another channel that is algorithmically based that you have to really focus on building content to do. But everyone's like, cool, well, it's social media and sexy. Make more stuff. Put it out. So I feel like this is a good opportunity for us to reset what the search channel is and also manage the expectations of like what sort of clicks you're going to get from it. I think at this point, we should be thinking like, let's call it, 60% performance, 40% brand, and then also, funded that way too, right? Like, cool, there's going to be 40% that we need to just do because there's going to be a lot of experimentation. And again, we may not get a lot of like direct response impact from it, but we are going to get brand lift from it. And there's going to be value there. And then the other 60% is like, all right, let's go lower in the funnel and let's recover that traffic and drive those outcomes in a way that we did before. But again, the channel's even gotten more efficient because when those users click through, they are actually looking to take action. So I think that there is like probably a simpler way to say everything that I said to your CFO and reframe the channel for them so that you can get more value out of it, also get more investment for it.
And if you need help reframing that to your CFO, ChatGPT will help you with that. Just take the transcripts from this audio and dump it into ChatGPT, clean it up.
Nice.
Yeah.
Have some wild hallucinations with them as well. Who knows?
I know as former SEOs, Simon and we could keep talking with you, Mike, forever. But we do have to wrap up. We're getting to the end here. And one thing we like to do is the incremental insight. We like to end the podcast with a takeaway. One thing that marketers and analysts listening can do immediately after listening to the show. Do you have some tidbit, some little nugget of wisdom, some tip, trick, article, podcast, video that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, I actually have a tool that I made rather, called Qforia. It's on the iPullRank website. And what it's for is identifying those query fan out keywords. So you put a keyword in, you got to get a Gemini key. I'm not doing this. Get a Gemini key, throw it in there, and then it's going to generate, all the projected queries that Google is likely to use. And then you can use that to build your strategy for these different circles.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, we'll put that link in the show notes, and as I was scribbling down a little tidbit at the end. So I think I've got one for us. In a world where relevance engineering is the primary method of intervening in the SERP, but you're still measuring a link by its ability to climb a SERP, well, then it's probably time to measure up.